The boy didn't know the man was worth $40 million. He just saw someone crying. It was the kind of Tuesday morning that smells like rain that hasn't fallen yet. Gray sky, pressing down on the bus depot on the edge of Millbrook, Ohio, where the sidewalk cracks run like old fault lines, and the coffee inside the diner costs $1.50 and nobody asks your name. Jasper had been sitting on the concrete planter outside the depot since 7:15, eating the only thing he'd packed that morning. Half a peanut butter sandwich in a folded paper towel, the bread already a little stiff on the edges. He was 11 years old. He had his mother's eyes, big and careful, the kind that noticed things other people walked past. And what he noticed was the man in the gray coat. The man was sitting on the metal bench by the bus schedule board, the kind of bench nobody sits on, voluntarily, unless their legs have simply stopped working. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most people in Millbrook made in a month, and he had his face in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking. Jasper watched him for a minute. Then, too, nobody else stopped. A woman with a rolling suitcase walked around him. A teenager with earbuds looked up, looked away. The depot attendant glanced through the glass and turned back to his screen. Jasper picked up his sandwich, walked over and sat down on the bench beside the man. "Sir," he said quietly, "are you okay?" The man lifted his face. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, with the kind of features that had once been sharp and were now just tired, heavy underneath the eyes, jaw unshaven in a way that wasn't stylish, just forgotten. His name was Edmund Crail, though Jasper wouldn't know that for a while yet. Edmund looked at the boy beside him. The boy in the too big jacket with the faded school logo. The boy holding out half a peanut butter sandwich like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm fine," Edmund said. His voice came out wrong, rough, like something had been broken inside it and hadn't healed straight. "You don't look fine," Jasper said. He said it without meanness, just as a fact. "I only have half a sandwich left, but you can have some if you want. My mom says food helps when you're sad." Edmund stared at him. He had not cried in 11 years, not when his wife left, not when the merger failed and he had to lay off 200 people, not when his father died in a hospital room in Phoenix and Edmund had been on a plane to Singapore and hadn't made it in time. He had learned to keep all of it sealed up in some interior room where it couldn't do damage. And for 11 years that room had held. He had started crying in the Millbrook bus depot because he had just read a text message from his daughter. A daughter he hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The text said, "I had a baby 6 weeks ago. A boy. I named him after Grandpa. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I guess I just thought you should know." That was all. No invitation, no softness, just information, sent to a stranger who happened to share her DNA. Edmund had read it 4 times. Then his face had gone into his hands, and now there was this child, holding out half a peanut butter sandwich in a paper towel. Looking at him with those big, careful eyes like Edmund was a problem worth solving. Edmund Crail, who had not accepted help from anyone in 30 years, reached out and took the sandwich. He didn't eat it right away. He just held it, and something about holding it, the smallness of it, the generosity of it, the sheer uncomplicated kindness of a child who had very little giving what he had, cracked something open that all the therapy he'd never gone to, and all the distance he'd carefully maintained, had never touched. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in a long time. "I'm Jasper," the boy said. "Edmund. That's an old-fashioned name. I'm an old-fashioned man." Jasper considered this. "My grandpa had an old-fashioned name too, Harold. He died last year." He said it simply, the way children sometimes speak about loss, not without grief, but without the elaborate flinching that adults develop around it. "He used to sit with me when I was sad too. That's how I knew to do it." Edmund looked at the boy for a long moment. "Your grandfather taught you well." "Yeah," Jasper looked down at his shoes. Worn through at one toe, the rubber sole separating at the heel. "He taught me a lot of stuff. Mom says he's still teaching me, just in a different way now. Your mom sounds smart. She's the smartest person I know." Jasper said it without hesitation, without performance. Pure fact. "She works double shifts at the hospital most weeks. She's a nursing aide. We don't have a lot, but she says that's okay because we have each other, and that's the math that matters." Edmund Crail, who had built a $40 million commercial real estate portfolio by understanding what things were worth, sat very still. That's the math that matters. He thought about his own daughter, Renata, 31 now, raising a baby alone in Columbus, while her father sat in a bus depot in a suit that cost $3,000, crying into his hands while a stranger's child offered him his last sandwich. He had gotten the math wrong. He had been getting it wrong for years, and he had not known it until right now, on this bench, in this gray Ohio morning. "What are you doing at the bus depot?" he asked Jasper. "Waiting for my mom to get off her shift. She works nights at Millbrook General and then takes the 8:40 bus. I walk here from school to meet her so she doesn't have to walk home alone." He said it like it was obvious, like of course an 11-year-old would walk to a bus depot every Tuesday to walk his tired mother home. "How far is home?" "About a mile. But she has a bad hip, so it takes a while." Jasper shrugged, unbothered. "I don't mind. I like walking with her. She tells me stuff about the patients. Not names, she's not allowed to say names, but the stories. There's this one man she has who keeps trying to escape and go find his wife, except his wife died 10 years ago and he doesn't remember. She says sometimes loving someone means just walking them back inside gently." Edmund looked away. Out at the parking lot where a pigeon was investigating a discarded fast food bag, his chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with his heart and everything to do with it. "How old are you, Jasper?" 11. "Almost 12. My birthday's in April. Do you always talk to strangers who are crying?" The boy thought about it seriously. "I talk to people who look like they need someone to talk to them." Grandpa said most people who look mean or weird are just people who've been lonely too long and started to go a little sideways. He looked at Edmund with those careful eyes. "You don't look mean. You look like you lost something." Edmund Crail had not lost something. He had thrown it away. He could see that now, in the uncomplicated mirror of this child's attention, with a clarity that was almost surgical. He had thrown away 3 years with his daughter because she had married a man he hadn't approved of, a school teacher from Columbus who didn't own property and didn't have a portfolio and didn't have prospects by any metric Edmund had ever used to measure a person. Edmund had said things at the wedding rehearsal dinner that he could not take back, and Renata had looked at him across the table with a look he still saw, sometimes when he woke at 3 a.m. Not angry, which would have been easier. Just quietly finished. She had stopped calling after Christmas of that year. He had told himself she would come around. He had told himself she was stubborn, that she'd gotten it from her mother, that she'd realize eventually that he'd only been trying to protect her. He had been very good at telling himself things. And then this morning, a text. "I had a baby 6 weeks ago. He had a grandchild he had never met, a boy named after his own father, Harold." Edmund pressed his thumb and forefinger to the bridge of his nose. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I did." Jasper's mother arrived on the 8:40 bus, just as a thin rain finally started to fall. Her name was Beverly Oakes, and she was 42 years old, and she had the walk of a person who has been on her feet for 12 hours, deliberate and careful, favoring the left hip, a tote bag on each shoulder. She had Jasper's same careful eyes. She stopped when she saw her son sitting on the bench next to a man in an expensive suit, and her expression did a quick, private calculation. "Jasper." Her voice was warm but watchful. "Mom, this is Edmund. He was having a bad morning." Beverly looked at Edmund. Edmund looked back at her. "I hope he kept you company," she said, carefully polite. "He did," Edmund said. He stood, which seemed like the right thing to do, and found that his legs felt steadier than they had an hour ago. "He also gave me half his sandwich. I want you to know you're raising an exceptional human being." Beverly's expression shifted, still cautious, but something in it softened around the edges. "He takes after his grandfather," he told me. Edmund hesitated. He was not a man who hesitated. Indecision had never been his problem. But he stood there in the thin rain and hesitated, because what he wanted to say was not the kind of thing he knew how to say. "Mrs. Oakes, I have a daughter I haven't spoken to in 3 years. I found out this morning that I have a grandchild I've never met. Your son, by doing one small kind thing, reminded me that I am running out of time to be the kind of person worth knowing." Beverly was quiet for a moment. The rain fell softly around them. Jasper looked between the two adults with the attentiveness of a child who understands that something real is happening. "That's not a small thing to figure out," Beverly said finally. "No, it isn't." She nodded once with the gravity of a woman who had learned to take people at their word or not at all. "I hope you do something about it." Edmund nodded back. He reached into his coat pocket and found a business card which felt completely inadequate, so he put it back. Instead, he said, "Is there anything, Anything at all that I can do for you or your son. Not out of guilt, out of genuine. He stopped, started again. Your son gave me something this morning that I didn't know I needed. I'd like to return something. We're all right, Beverly said. Mom, Jasper said, then quietly. His shoes have holes in them. Beverly looked at her son for a long moment, then back at Edmund. A private war crossed her face, the pride of a woman who had managed on her own and intended to keep managing, against the practicality of someone who knew that her son's feet were going to be wet all winter. He needs new shoes, she said finally, like a confession. I've been saving up. He needs a proper winter coat too. The one he has is 3 years old and barely. She stopped herself. Tell me where you shop, Edmund said. What followed was not dramatic. It did not involve lawyers or enormous checks or revelations in oak-paneled offices. Edmund Crail drove Beverly and Jasper to the Meijer on Route 9, and he bought Jasper a pair of good winter boots and a proper coat. Not the most expensive in the store, because Beverly steered him away from those with a firm hand, and he bought Beverly coffee from the diner next door, and they sat in a booth while Jasper wore the new boots immediately and refused to take them off. He also called Renata. He called her from the parking lot while Beverly and Jasper waited inside, and his hand on the phone shook in a way it had not shaken since he was young. She answered on the 4th ring. Dad. One word. He heard everything in it, the wariness and the old wound, and underneath both of those, like something that had been buried but not extinguished, something that still held warmth. Renata. He pressed the phone to his ear and looked up at the gray Ohio sky. I got your text. I've been... He stopped. Started over. He had given too many speeches in his life, and every instinct he had wanted to begin one now, organized, structured, persuasive. He put all of those instincts aside. I'm so sorry, for what I said, for the years I wasted being wrong about what mattered. I'm sorry I missed so much. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that he thought she might hang up. Then, he looks like you, the baby. I kept thinking I'd be annoyed about it, but mostly I just think it's funny. Edmund Crail laughed. It came out rough and sudden and not quite all the way, the laugh of a man who was out of practice. Harold, he said. Yeah, Harold James. After Grandpa and after Marcus, that's his dad, my husband. A careful emphasis on husband, a quiet establishing of ground. I know, Edmund said. I'd like to meet him, if that's something you'd want. Another silence. Shorter this time. I'll talk to Marcus, she said. I'm not making any promises, Dad, but I'll talk to him. That's more than I deserve, Edmund said. I know that. What happened in the weeks that followed was not a fairy tale, because real repair isn't one. Renata did talk to Marcus, and Marcus, who was, Edmund would discover, a steadier and better man than Edmund had ever given himself credit for seeing, said that he was willing to have one dinner. One. And they would see. The dinner was held in Renata and Marcus's apartment in Columbus, the kind of apartment that was small and warm and filled with things that mattered. Books stacked sideways on the shelves. Because there wasn't enough room, a mobile over the baby's bassinet made from painted wooden birds, a photograph of Renata and Marcus on a hiking trail somewhere, laughing, the kind of laughing that lives in your body, not just your face. Edmund held little Harold for approximately 4 minutes before his eyes went blurry. He handed the baby back and excused himself to the bathroom, where he ran cold water over his wrists, the way his mother had taught him to do when things got to be too much. When he came back out, Marcus was in the kitchen and Renata was sitting on the couch with the baby, and she looked up at Edmund with an expression he hadn't seen from her in a long time. You okay? She asked. No, Edmund said, but I think that's the right way to be right now. She made room for him on the couch. He sat beside his daughter for the first time in 3 years, in her small, warm apartment in Columbus, with his father's name sleeping in her arms. He drove back to Millbrook afterward. He wasn't sure why he came back. He had no real reason to be in Millbrook. He had an apartment in Cincinnati and a house in Scottsdale. But he found himself on Route 9 as the evening came down, and then on the street where the bus depot sat. Quiet now, the pigeons roosted for the night. He stopped at the diner. He ordered coffee and a slice of pie he didn't need. The woman at the counter recognized him. Small towns have a long memory for men in expensive suits who buy children winter boots at the Meijer. And she said, "You're the fella who was at the depot. I am Bev's boy, talked about you." She poured the coffee without being asked for a refill. Said you were sad and he helped you. He did. Edmund said. "He helped me more than he knows." She considered him over the counter. Her name, according to the tag on her apron, was June, and she had the manner of a woman who had made a study of people over many years and reached some private conclusions. "That's a good kid," she said. "Hard life, but good. Beverly's worked herself half to pieces for him." "I know." Edmund wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. "I'd like to do something for them." Without making it, he searched for the word. "Weird," June supplied. "Yes, without making it weird." She looked at him for a moment. "Beverly's been trying to get Jasper into that STEM program over at the community center for 2 years. It costs $400 for the year, and she can never quite get there. The boy's got a mind for it. His teacher says he's something special with math and science, says he thinks sideways in the best way." Edmund nodded. "What's the program called?" "Millbrook Youth Science Initiative. They do robotics, engineering, the whole thing." June refilled her own coffee, a small, satisfied gesture. "Registration opens in January." Edmund paid for his coffee and his pie, and he left a generous tip, and he drove back to his Cincinnati apartment with the windows down despite the cold because he needed the air. In January, Beverly received a letter from the Millbrook Youth Science Initiative informing her that Jasper Oaks had been enrolled in the full-year program, fees paid in full by an anonymous donor. Included was a handwritten note that said only, "Your son reminded me that the math that matters is different than the math I'd been doing. Thank you." She read it 3 times. Then she put it on the refrigerator, next to Jasper's drawings and a photograph of her father. Jasper came home from school and saw it and read it and said, "Is that from Edmund?" "I think so," Beverly said. "I hope he's okay," Jasper said. He went to the refrigerator and poured himself a glass of milk with the efficiency of a child who had been doing things for himself since he was small. He seemed like someone who hadn't been taken care of in a long time. Beverly looked at her son, 11 years old, worn shoes traded for good boots, a mind like a compass always pointing toward what mattered. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think you're right about that." The Millbrook Youth Science Initiative met on Thursday evenings in the community center on Cedar Street, and Jasper Oaks arrived on the first Thursday in February with a composition notebook and 3 sharpened pencils, and found that he was not the only child there who had been waiting a long time for something like this. Edmund Crail drove up from Cincinnati on a Saturday in March to have coffee with Beverly and walk to the depot and back, the way Jasper had described walking with his mother, slow and deliberate on the winter sidewalks. It was not a friendship exactly. The distance between their lives was too wide for that word. It was something more honest than most friendships. 2 people who had given each other something real on an ordinary morning, and who understood the weight of that. Edmund brought photographs of baby Harold, which he had started carrying in his wallet. Beverly looked at them for a long time. "He's beautiful," she said. "He's enormous," Edmund said. 12 pounds at the last checkup. Marcus says he's built like a linebacker. Renata says that comes from my side of the family, and I am choosing to take that as a compliment." Beverly laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in front of him, and it was the real kind. Unguarded, sudden, the laugh of someone who rarely allows themselves to be caught off guard. "How are things with Renata?" she asked. Edmund considered the honest answer, which was the only kind he was trying to give anymore. "Better than I deserve and not yet as good as I hope. We have dinner once a month. She's letting me be in the room, which is more than she had to do." He looked down at the coffee mug between his hands. "Marcus is teaching me how to take photographs on my phone. Not just point and click, properly. Light, composition. He's very patient." A pause. "He's a better man than I gave him credit for. Most people are," Beverly said. "Yes," Edmund agreed. "I'm learning that." On a Thursday in April, the week before Jasper's birthday, the Millbrook Youth Science Initiative held a small demonstration night where the kids showed their families what they'd been building. Jasper Oaks had spent 6 weeks designing a small automated irrigation system out of PVC pipe and a microcontroller, the kind of thing that could be used in a backyard garden or, theoretically, scaled up. His instructor called it one of the most practical projects she'd seen in 3 years of running the program. Beverly stood in the community center gym with tears she refused to let fall, and her hand pressed to her mouth. Jasper explained how the sensor worked. Soil moisture level triggers the pump. Timed intervals prevent overwatering. The system can run off a small solar panel if needed. And he explained it the way he explained everything, in that patient voice that had once talked a crying stranger off a bus depot bench. Clear, careful, kind. Edmund was not there. He had not known about the demonstration. Beverly had not thought to tell him, but when she described it to him on the phone that night, she could hear something in the long pause that followed that sounded like a man revising his interior calculations. "He's going to be something," Edmund said. "That kid, he already is something," Beverly said. Another silence, and in that silence was something that neither of them put into words, but that lived there nonetheless. The understanding that a boy who gives away his last sandwich on a gray Tuesday morning is already operating at a level of richness that has nothing to do with what he owns. "I know," Edmund said quietly. "I know he is." On Jasper's 12th birthday, Beverly made a chocolate cake from her mother's recipe. The kind with the frosting that's more butter than sugar and tastes like childhood, and Jasper ate 2 pieces and asked for a third. And Beverly said yes because it was his birthday, and birthdays are for thirds. Later, doing the dishes, she thought about the month that had passed since the demonstration night. She thought about the irrigation system, currently sitting in the corner of their apartment with a small basil plant attached to it, working perfectly. She thought about Jasper's composition notebook, now filled to the last page. She thought about the photograph on the refrigerator. The math that matters is different than the math I'd been doing. She thought about her own father, Harold, who had sat beside her on the worst nights of her life, with the patience of someone who knew that sometimes presence was the whole of what was needed, who had taught her what kindness looked like when it was genuine. Not grand, not performative, just there, just given freely, without accounting for what might come back. She thought about how her son had learned it, how it had traveled through the years from an old man's hands to a small boy's, and then from that boy to a stranger on a cold bench in a bus depot, and from that stranger to a daughter who had almost given up, and from that daughter to a baby boy sleeping in Columbus with his great-grandfather's name. Kindness moves. That was the thing. You couldn't hold it still. The moment you received it, it was already looking for somewhere to go. She put the last dish in the rack and dried her hands. From the other room, Jasper was talking to himself, or possibly to the basil plant, explaining something about conductivity in soil. His voice was low and steady, and full of the particular pleasure of someone who has found the thing they are meant to understand. Beverly leaned against the doorframe and listened. The refrigerator hummed. The basil grew. Outside, the April night was soft and full of almost spring, and in a hospital room in Columbus, a baby named Harold James slept with his fist pressed to his cheek, dreaming whatever newborns dream, entirely unaware that he had already changed a life, that his existence, announced in 12 plain words to a man sitting in a bus depot, had set something turning that would not stop. Some things begin with a sandwich. Most things begin smaller than we think.